be just wonderful. You know, it's wonderful to be here again for another one.
Well, I think that's clear, don't you?
Yes.
You know, every enrolled Baha'i throughout the world has accepted the station of the Bab and Baha'u'llah.
You are invited to a special study class on the significance of covenant breaking in relationship to the majesty and greatness of the covenant of Baha'u'llah. The class is being conducted by hand of the course, Mr. William Sears. He is being assisted by Mr. Anthony Lease, a member of the Auxiliary Board for the Hands of the Faith in the Western Hemisphere. I'm Robert Quigley, your host for the evening. The study class is already in session, so let's join them. Mr. Sears is talking with a group of Baha'is from various communities in the Southern California area.
Tremendous assaults. No wonder the Baha'is of the world are so confident, so assured. Faith is protected by an everlasting covenant. This is one of the great protective features of our faith, makes it unique in religious history. Because of the majesty and greatness of this covenant, attacks against it become a grave and unpardonable crime. For such attacks would not only endanger the spiritual future of the individual, but would strike at the very foundation of the future peace and security of all mankind.
Yes. With such a wonderful covenant, and it certainly is that, why do we have covenant breaking?
Well, there's always an element of perversity. Such attacks prove the strength of the covenant. They bind the believers closer together.
I'm extremely pleased that at last we're having an entire study class on this particular subject.
Yeah, sure we are.
Frankly, I'd like to know a lot more about the significance of covenant breaking, about what a covenant breaker is, how can we tell, and what we can and should do about it.
All right, good. Every Baha'i should know the answer to those questions.
I have written down 5 questions of my own.
Only 5? What, did you run out of paper or out of ink?
5 to start with.
All right, what are they? I was only teasing. No more questions appear.
1, what exactly is a covenant breaker? 2, how can we tell? 3, what should we do with their unwanted correspondence? 4, how do we answer those people who say that since we believe in the independent investigation of truth, why shouldn't they find out what the covenant breakers think?
Yes, I've heard that one already.
Yeah. 5, how do we answer those who say that if we believe in unity, shouldn't we find a way to bring the covenant breakers back rather than shun them and have nothing to do with them? And 6...
You said 5.
Yeah. I just thought of another one.
Well, I hope you'll think of 10 more, and we'll answer them all before the evening's over. As you know, I've been greatly blessed to have the help of Mr. Anthony Lease, a member of the Auxiliary Board for the Hands of the Faith in the Western Hemisphere. Tony's been good enough to look up a number of useful and exciting references on our subject for tonight. Because, you know, it isn't our own ideas that are important, but what the writings say about them. That's the important thing, the vital thing. Tony, suppose we begin with the beloved guardian's words to America, written less than 2 months before his passing.
All right, Bill. September 21st, 1957. Your assembly cannot be too careful or vigilant in watching over the community, seeking out the sources of corruption and protecting the friends. He, the beloved guardian, feels that a course on the significance of covenant breaking should be included in the summer school curriculum so that the friends may understand the nature of this evil and how it has affected our faith for 100 years and other faiths in the past. The American Baha'is, aside from the older ones, do not seem to have any concept whatsoever of what a covenant breaker is.
That's so true. At least I, for one, am not at all satisfied with my own knowledge about covenant breakers and the significance of covenant breaking.
Well, you see, with so many new young Baha'is entering the faith all around the world, this lack of understanding about the true nature and significance of covenant breaking becomes serious, and we should remedy it.
How?
Well, the most effective way to protect the faith is to deepen the understanding of the friends so they're prepared to meet these tests or attacks before they arise. The thing we need and should have is a campaign of preparedness. Prevent the fires from starting, and not be a fire company that races to put out the blaze after it started. And this is why your National Assembly wants you to deepen your understanding in this vital area of the faith, the covenant.
But isn't there a danger of accusing people of being covenant breakers who really are not?
Well, we don't have witch hunting in the Baha'i faith, as you know. And by the time we're through here tonight, I am hopeful that at least this group will never have that problem again.
Well, I've heard of cases where people would say or imply that so-and-so was a covenant breaker, and it turned out to be quite wrong when the truth was known. But it caused a lot of damage and unhappiness.
Yes, and inexcusable.
Yes,
Well, how do we prevent it then?
Well, you see, it's not the responsibility nor the right of any individual Baha'i to say who is or who is not a covenant breaker.
Yeah.
This is a matter that is something that's the sole responsibility of the World Center. The announcement of who is a covenant breaker comes only from there. Until such a statement has been made, no one can be considered to be a covenant breaker. Now, if we believe that someone has unquestionably proved themselves to be disloyal to the faith, then we report it to the hands of the faith, the members of the Auxiliary Board, the National Assembly, but nothing more. Our responsibility as individuals does not include making prejudgments.
Oh. Well, I think this problem sometimes arises because there's still some confusion in the minds of the friends about the difference between losing one's voting rights and actually being expelled from the faith.
Well, perhaps.
Very true.
So let's clear that up right away. Shoghi Effendi, I think, told us plainly what the loss of voting rights meant. And these are his words from Baha'i News 1940. Such action which national spiritual assemblies have been empowered to take against such recalcitrant members, however justified and no matter how severe, should under no circumstances be considered as implying the complete expulsion of the individual affected from the cause.
In other words, then, one is administrative and one is spiritual.
Yes, you could say that.
The punishment, I mean. Although punishment, I'm sure, is the wrong word.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it is the wrong word. For unlike the religious history of the past, the Baha'i faith doesn't punish. It tries to heal and correct. But your thought is basically sound. As you'll see from the beloved guardian's additional comments in that same letter, I think this should make the distinction between loss of voting rights and covenant breaking unmistakably clear to everyone once and for all.
Shoghi Effendi goes on. The suspension of voting rights and other administrative rights of an individual, always conditional and therefore temporary, can never have such far-reaching implications since it constitutes merely an administrative sanction, whereas his expulsion or excommunication from the faith has far-reaching spiritual implications affecting the very soul of that believer.
Okay, is that clear?
Yes.
You see, the National Assemblies remove voting rights, and when the problem's corrected, they can restore them. But only the World Center can expel. That right of expulsion exercised by Abdu'l-Baha, the beloved guardian, as the spiritual world head of the faith, still resides in the Holy Land and nowhere else. Such grave offenders of the faith are expelled by the hands of the cause of God, but with the approval of the Universal House of Justice, which acts in their capacity as the supreme world authority of the Baha'i community. And until such an announcement comes from the World Center, we don't know who is and who is not a covenant breaker. I believe Shoghi Effendi's had something more to say on that, didn't he, Tony?
Yes, Bill, he certainly did. These are his words. The former, loss of voting rights, is an administrative sanction, whereas the latter, expulsion, is essentially spiritual, involving not only the particular relationship of a believer to his local or national spiritual assembly, but his very spiritual existence in the cause. It follows, therefore, that a believer can continue calling himself a Baha'i even though he may cease to be a voting member of the community. But in case he is excluded from the body of the cause, he ceases to be a believer and cannot possibly identify himself even nominally with the faith.
Unquote. Does that clear up the difference between losing your voting rights and being
Certainly
expelled
does.
from the faith?
Yes, that's very plain.
You know, we're shepherds of the flock. We must do everything we can to protect the lamb from the wolf. And we mustn't let small dissatisfactions grow into more serious trouble. Shoghi Effendi had something to say in that, too.
Yes, Bill. Quote, the spiritual assembly should realize that its relationship to the believers is not merely that of a formal constitutional body, but also that of a spiritual institution called upon to manifest the attributes of courtesy, patience, and loving insight. Many conditions are not to be remedied by the exercise of power and authority, but rather by a sympathetic understanding of the sources of the difficulty in the hearts of the friends.
That's right.
Wonderful.
You see, a minor trouble, if treated early, can be cured more easily, just as it can in medicine. But if you allow it to rankle, it may become virulent or even malignant. Our greatest protection, therefore, is always prevention beforehand, and love is always the sovereign remedy. Shoghi Effendi writes, as Abdu'l-Baha has explained, some of the people are children and must be trained. Some are ignorant and must be educated. Some are sick and must be healed. Where, however, the problem is not of this order, but represents flagrant disobedience and disloyalty to the cause itself, in that case, the Assembly should consult with the National Assembly concerning the necessity for disciplinary action.
Perhaps we're dwelling far too long on this, but I'm finding it very helpful.
What else is troubling you?
If you lose your voting rights, how do you get them back?
Well, that's simple. You ask for them back. The arms of the faith are always wide open, you know, to welcome those who are sincere. All such a person has to do is to correct the mistake or the situation which led to the removal of his or her voting rights. Then write to the National Spiritual Assembly, expressing a sincere regret for those past actions and asking to be reinstated as a member of the faith in good standing. If they are sincere, they will be welcomed back.
I like the term welcomed back and not allowed back.
Yeah. Well, there's no stigma attached to reinstatement. The past is forgotten. There's no retribution, no suspicion, no spiritual probation for a sincere soul. Your faith is a faith of love, you know. How many of you, by the way, are members of local spiritual assembly? Well, then suppose I share with you these final words on the subject from the beloved guardian. Tony?
Shoghi Effendi says, the best criterion whereby you can measure the spiritual attainment of an assembly is the extent its members feel themselves responsible for the welfare of the group. And perchance they feel forced to deprive a person from his vote. It should be only to safeguard the rest, and not merely to inflict punishment, end quote.
Yes, but it is the National Assembly that removes the voting rights and not the local assemblies, right?
Right. The beloved guardian advises every administrative body as follows. It is only when repeated warnings are unheeded. Note that word that the guardian uses there, repeated. It is only when repeated warnings are unheeded and deliberate disloyalty has become manifest that the extreme measure of expulsion should be taken. The test, he says, of our collective wisdom is the capacity to distinguish between deliberate disloyalty and the errors that proceed from lack of knowledge and immaturity.
Well, just one more question, and then I promise I'm finished on this subject.
No, please, the night is yours. I mean, the very most we can ever hope to do in one evening is stimulate interest. The real answers are in the writings. The friend should turn to them, study them, meditate on them. What is the question?
Well, you mentioned the grave sanctions that are imposed upon one who loses his voting rights. What are these sanctions?
Well, they've been shared with us in several places. Tony, what are the exact words of the guardian's instruction?
They're these, Bill. Quote, regarding the matter of believers who have been deprived of their voting rights, he says, just as no one should ever be deprived of his voting right lightly, it should likewise be realized that to be deprived of it is a grave matter, involving heavy penalties spiritually. People who have been so deprived should not be permitted to attend any meetings involving the administration of the cause, such as an election or a 19-day feast. They can attend the 9 holy days, however. They should not be married by Baha'i law. No money should be accepted from them. They should not be given credentials, which imply a member of the community in good standing.
Well, is that clear?
I think that's clear. But they're not covenant breakers, and we do not shun them.
No, they are not, and we do not.
I would like to get back to the significance of covenant breaking.
So would I.
Okay, fair enough. What's the first question?
Well, why is it so dangerous for believers not to understand the significance of covenant breaking? Well, aren't we protected by the fact that we are Baha'i?
Well, the problem is this. The warm, open-hearted, loving, hospitable nature of the Baha'is, particularly the new enthusiastic young believers, when coupled with inexperience, leaves them vulnerable and open to a very real danger, both to themselves and to the faith they love.
In what special way?
Well, suppose suddenly they find themselves confronted by a sly, ruthless, and deadly enemy whose sole purpose in being sweet and friendly and honey-tongued is to mislead them and dampen their enthusiasm.
What can they do? How can they tell whether such a person is sincere or not?
Well, if these people are known covenant breakers, we, of course, avoid them entirely. If we don't know, then we have to be alert. And when we detect anything that sounds like an attack, however subtly and lovingly phrased, then we know, and we're alert. Dear friends, you know when a spy enters a country, such as ours, for the purpose of causing confusion and disloyalty among the citizens, he doesn't come as an enemy saying, I hate your country. He comes posing as a friend. But if you're awake and alert, you soon detect his subtle manipulation of ideas. Now, this is exactly how the covenant breakers work. They are, in fact, spiritual spies who are committed to the destruction of the faith.
Could you give us a concrete example?
Yes, I'll give you one from my own experience. I was in Europe. A stranger approached me. It was so sincere that it was insincere, smarmy and over-solicitous. My antenna went up right away. He praised the greatness of the cause and the beloved guardian. Then he smiled at me and he said, isn't it a pity, though, that the Universal House of Justice doesn't have the presence of the beloved guardian so that the Baha'is could be assured of their infallibility? I just looked at it. He said, what's your reaction? I said, can I see your credentials? Well, you see, now, supposing that happens to a new believer who may not yet understand the infallibility of the Universal House of Justice upon all things not recorded in the book was given to them by Baha'u'llah himself. This infallibility does not depend upon the presence of the beloved guardian among them. They each, House of Justice and Guardian, We're given a special and distinct infallibility. But the covenant breakers like to try and twist things to cause doubts. If we know the covenant and the teachings, then they can't. Once a believer courageously challenges such attacks, the covenant breaker shows his true colors. He exposes himself as an enemy of the faith, so we shun him immediately, for his very breath is poison, spiritual poison.
But, Bill, that seems like such strong language. I know it's true, but sometimes the new believers are confused by the very force of these statements about covenant breakers.
Well, beloved friends, fasten your seatbelts, because that's a very mild type of language compared to what you're going to hear before this night is over. Let's take our own country again. When a nation captures and convicts a spy, a traitor from among its own people, one who coldly and maliciously has tried to betray his own nation and people, what do they do about it?
Well, if he's guilty, they put him to death.
Right, shot at sunrise, as they say. He loses his life for his treason. Now, that is a form of political covenant breaking. No punishment is considered too severe. No nation will tolerate it. Imagine that, when that treason and betrayal are directed against the messenger of God for all mankind. Not one nation, but all humanity. This covenant breaker attacks not the body, a temporary physical thing. He attacks the person's soul, an eternal and divine thing. He doesn't attack an assembly. He attacks the world order of Baha'u'llah, the divine framework which is the very pattern and hope for the future society of all men. These covenant breakers, you see, are enemies who try to undermine the faith and the administrative order of the promised one of all religions, the sole redeemer of mankind, the one who has resurrected those who were spiritually dead as promised by Christ. And they want to send them back to their spiritual tombs of death. They want to undermine the faith and the hope of innocent souls and destroy their belief. They want to poison and put out those lights which they can't stand. They're like bats of darkness who hate the light. They destroy your belief, corrupt your sweet hopes, and extinguish that everlasting creation of God, the human spirit, if they could. Now do you begin to see why the Baha'i community must be protected against them and why the language is so strong. Why we try to rescue them themselves from that dread disease before they are lost forever. Our writings tell us that the faith of Baha'u'llah is the one message that can extricate humanity from the morass into which it is sinking. That it's the sole refuge for a tottering civilization. That it is the salvation of society. That the future peace, security, and happiness of all men depend upon it. Well, do we dare then to let anyone threaten this God-given structure?
No.
The pity is, dear friends, that we're just awakening to the vital importance of this grave responsibility. Yes. And there's no crime to compare with it, none. We have to act and not be wishy-washy. Tony, I'm referring particularly to that letter, April 1949. You know, the letter we were talking about before.
Yes.
I think you have it there.
Yes, the Guardian said, quote, "It is a pity that some of the Western friends, with remarkable naivete, do not grasp the fact that there is absolutely nothing keeping those who have broken the covenant out of the cause except their own inner spiritually sick condition."
You see,
That's
dear friend?
wonderful.
Don't feel sad for them. Feel sympathetic for the cause of God, which they're seeking to destroy.
The beloved Guardian continues, "Unfortunately, a man who is ill is not made well by just asserting that there is nothing wrong with him. Facts, actual states, are what count. Probably no group of people in the world have softer tongues or proclaim more loudly their innocence than those who in their heart of hearts and by their every act are enemies of the center of the covenant. The Master well knew this, and that is why he said we must shun their company, but pray for them. If you put a leper in a room with healthy people, he cannot catch their health. On the contrary, they are very likely to catch his horrible ailment."
The entire thing is a quote from the Guardian. And how to treat covenant breakers is that simple. Once we understand this principle, we'll shut them out of our lives just as firmly and uncompromisingly as we would shut out someone with the bubonic plague or the cholera.
Sometimes I think that people outside the faith find it difficult to understand our views concerning covenant breaking.
Yes.
Well, even some of the friends themselves don't understand it really, especially the new ones. But I can certainly see why now. They just haven't been deepened in their understanding of the covenant itself.
Well, friends, I hope this session we're having tonight is helping to clear up some of these misunderstandings.
Well, certainly
I
has
hope
for
you'll
me.
share them with everyone else.
Yes. I can see that we have to give up any idea that these covenant breakers are just poor, misguided souls, and that we really ought to try and help them.
And thus prevent ourselves, or if we try to help them, we help ourselves to a virulent case of spiritual infection. We have to prevent that. We have to learn never to make that fatal mistake. Pray for them, but shun them.
What's the best answer to give to outsiders, or even to some Baha'is who say, but shouldn't we have unity to our misguided? Aren't they lost sheep? If we shun them, how can we maintain our unity?
Well, they're not lost sheep, they're sick sheep. And the shepherd cuts them out immediately before the disease goes through and destroys the entire flock.
I've heard some people say, wouldn't it be wiser to try and woo them back from their mistaken ideas? Maybe they just don't understand. If we want a united world body, shouldn't we make an effort to get them back?
Sounds familiar. Or maybe they'll say, but I know so-and-so personally. I'm sure he'd listen to me. Perhaps nobody's approached him in just the right way yet. Is this what you mean?
Exactly.
Well, what do you say to them?
Pretty much what you've been saying just now, but I'll tell you one thing, I'll be a lot stronger in the future.
Good.
Well, I think I, at least, have really learned how vitally important it is for the friends to understand the nature and greatness of the covenant. Once they do, they'll realize the appalling nature of any association with the covenant breakers, and they'll know better just how to deal with them.
That's the secret. And as to the question of unity in the faith, I suggest we let the beloved guardian's own words answer that question.
Shoghi Effendi answered the question this way.
May I interrupt just a moment, Tony? You know, when Tony and I say Shoghi Effendi said, sometimes it's his own words, and sometimes it's his secretary writing in his behalf. Both, of course, are equally valid, but I wanted to make that point.
These souls, covenant breakers, Shoghi Effendi writes, are not lost forever. God will forgive any soul if he repents. Most of them don't want to repent, unfortunately. Also, it has nothing to do with unity in the cause. If a man cuts a cancer out of his body to preserve his health and very life, no one would suggest that for the sake of unity, it should be reintroduced into the otherwise healthy organism. On the contrary, what was once a part of him has so radically changed as to have become a poison.
I think that nails it down. Now, are there any questions about
you've answered them all.
Well, beloved friends, let's have a break and talk about the victories of the faith. There have never been such victories ever before. Even those I told you about during our last recording session, they were nothing compared to what is happening over the entire surface of the world.
The study class on the significance of covenant breaking and the protection of the cause of Baha'u'llah will continue after a brief social intermission, during which our Baha'i guests will rejoice in the unprecedented number of new Baha'i victories which are taking place in all parts of the planet. The most interesting part is still to come. Our study class continues. It is being conducted by Hand of the Cause William Sears, assisted by Mr. Anthony Lease, a member of the Auxiliary Board for the Hands of the Faith in the Western Hemisphere.
One of the points made by some of the present covenant breakers, enemies of the faith, is that there is a great catastrophe coming, and that there will be gigantic floods and all that. When we hear such stories, sometimes repeated by the believers, what should we do?
Don't build an ark.
I like that. That's funny.
There won't be a flood or a catastrophe.
I mean, I don't know a thing about it, and neither does anyone else. Those who have set specific dates have always been disappointed, and their followers disillusioned. Our job is to carry on the work of the 9-year plan. Yes. That we can do. The real catastrophe, obviously, is a spiritual catastrophe. To think that we, the American Baha'is, have been given this world redemptive teaching mission, and we still get ourselves sidetracked with these unimportant things over which we have no control.
Yes, but catastrophes have been mentioned in the writing.
Well, of course there's going to be an apocalyptic upheaval sometime. That's not a Baha'i teaching. That goes back as far as Isaiah, Daniel, Joel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Christ. It didn't originate with Baha'u'llah or the Master or Shoghi Effendi. And even Christ himself said that only the Father knew the time. Yeah. In the Baha'i News of April 1950, Shoghi Effendi tried to get the friends to direct their efforts to teaching and not to lay undue emphasis on such things as catastrophes. He wrote as follows, I'm quoting, "We have no indication of exactly what nature the apocalyptic upheaval might be. It might be another war. But as students of our Baha'i writings, it is clear that the longer the divine physician, that is Baha'u'llah, is withheld from healing the ills of the world, the more severe will be the crisis, and the more terrible the sufferings of the patient." Right. End quote. So you see, it's clear that our job is to teach and to teach and to teach, and do all we can to bring Baha'u'llah's healing message to the world, and not get sidetracked in those things that are in God's hands and not ours. If we don't do that, then that is the real catastrophe.
Yes.
I think if we were firm in the covenant and clearly understood the covenant, we wouldn't be confused by such things.
Very true.
Well, let's try to stick to our subject from now on.
Okay, I'm all for that. I think that'll be fine.
Where do we begin?
Well, I suggest the book, The Baha'i World Faith, and also the compilation on covenant breaking, which you'll find in the old World Order magazines. Go back and dig in those, study them. They offer more than enough material for a complete summer school course on the significance of covenant breaking. Baha'u'llah himself warned, and you'll find it in those pages, and these are his words, that the company of the wicked covenant breakers changeth the light of life into the fire of remorse. So you see, from the founder of our faith himself, we received these warnings. Warnings which the Master and the beloved guardian urged us to obey and to apply without exception.
Or did the instruction to shun the covenant breakers come from Baha'u'llah also?
Baha'u'llah used even stronger language than shun. He said, no one should go near them. These are his words. No one should go near them, because their breath is like the poison that kills instantly. Right. Baha'u'llah, as well as the Master, warned the Baha'is not to be deceived because these enemies appear to be outwardly friendly. Baha'u'llah declared, quote, if you detect in any man the least perceptible breath of violation, shun him and keep away from him. Baha'u'llah forbade all association with the violators immediately for our own protection. Avoid such enemies, Baha'u'llah instructed, even though he may appear in the garb of piety.
That's pretty plain.
I think it's helpful to hear those words of Baha'u'llah. Quite a number of the friends think that all these prohibitions against covenant breakers is something of fairly recent origin.
Yes, I know they do. But the truth is that covenant breaking is as old as the history of religion itself. In our day, the day of the Baha'i faith, for the first time, the founders of a religion left a written covenant as an historical document. And they also left written instructions to those who would safeguard and protect that covenant. The covenant was unprecedented. Its protection must be unprecedented. The Master, Abdul-Baha, was particularly forceful in his instructions on this matter to those of us who live in the West, because this is the cradle of the administrative order. In his will and testament, which is the charter of this administrative order, Abdul-Baha warned us in these words. Tony?
For so grievous is the conduct and behavior of this false people, the Master writes, that they are become even as an axe striking at the very root of the blessed tree.
Imagine.
Should they be suffered to continue, they would in but a few days' time exterminate the cause of God, His Word, and themselves.
Well, that's why the Master took such strong, direct action against them like that. Once we know there is violation, there can be no debating about the matter. Should we do this? Should we do that? Before another drop of the poison spreads, they're cut off completely.
It is really an assault on the faith itself, isn't it?
With the clear intention of overthrowing.
It is indeed. Yes. But because of the wisdom of the central figures of our faith, and because of the very instructions we're discussing and sharing here tonight, all of these attacks of the enemy have been repulsed and frustrated. Way back in 1921, the Master warned those Baha'is in America exactly what was happening.
In America in these days, the Master wrote, severe winds have surrounded the lamp of the covenant, hoping that this brilliant light may be extinguished and this tree of life may be uprooted. Certain weak, capricious, malicious, and ignorant souls have been shaken by the earthquake of hatred, of animosity, have striven to efface the divine covenant and testament.
The earthquake of hatred. That's what the Master calls their affliction. What a term.
Yeah. Yes.
And this is in his very last tablet to the American Baha'is. And there's more.
Abdu'l-Baha says, quote, they have arisen against the center of the covenant, and every moment uttered a calumny. Every day they seek a pretext and secretly arouse doubts, so that the covenant of Baha'u'llah may be completely annihilated in America.
Oh, friends of God, the Master wrote, be awake, be vigilant, be vigilant. And the early American believers were alert and vigilant to his instructions. And so the faith went from victory to victory as the power of these enemies weakened.
But there aren't any more of those old warriors of the covenant left, are there?
Well, you're right. You see, now an entire new generation of believers has arisen. And they have not shared the experience of those early Baha'is who had been so sharply aware of the meaning of covenant breaking, its significance, warned by the Master and the beloved guardian. We have all the essential instructions and all the authentic texts in our hands. But we become so busy with our spiritual conquest of the planet and teaching that sometimes, unhappily, we forget the importance of this need for protection.
That's true.
Yes.
It seems to me that the story of the early victories would help the Friends.
Yes,
if they
I
studied.
think.
Well, I was just wondering about the wondrous figures of the Bab and Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha, as well as our beloved guardian who symbolized for us this fateful struggle between good and evil,
Yes,
have passed away from history.
Yes, you
What do
put
you
your
think?
finger on a good point there. Because they're gone, we've lost that close contact. We miss that love that flowed from them to us, those warnings that came to us constantly. It's very important that we have that. But this is why those of us who are living in this day are now called upon by our Supreme Universal House of Justice to be just as alert. Abdul-Baha repeatedly warned the faithful Friends to beware of the sweet and honeyed tongue, his words, of the covenant breakers. He entreated the Friends to avoid all association with such an embodiment of hatred, even, and these are his words, even though he may quote all the heavenly utterances and cling to all the heavenly books.
That's a terrible indictment, isn't it?
What?
Embodiment of hatred.
Yes, it's dreadful, but you notice that Abdul-Baha doesn't say body of hatred. He says embodiment. It is the disease that is infectious and killing. We never hate the patient who has the rabies. We hate the disease. And if it is infectious like cholera, we isolate them at once and prevent all communications with them. This is the life-saving, spirit-saving, faith-protecting principle that we should have before us at all times.
My limited experience has been that these covenant breakers are very insidious. They'll praise Abdu'l-Baha with such love that it takes quite some time before you're aware of the fact that he's belittling the beloved guardian.
Yes, I see you catch on very quickly to their methods.
And as soon as you detected his method, I hope you had nothing whatsoever to do with him.
I certainly didn't. Out.
Out right away. Good.
With a potential plague or epidemic threatening, I can see it's no place for kindness or sympathy.
Well, Abdul-Baha said that to be kind to the wolf is to be cruel to the sheep.
Well, that subtle method of attack has been the pattern of the covenant breakers since the earliest days of our blessed cause, hasn't it, Bill?
Yes, it has.
I mean, to quote voluminously from the sacred text or those parts of the text which they adjust to fit their own purpose.
Oh, they're clever. Make no mistake about that. The covenant breakers quoted the Bab while they were trying to deny Baha'u'llah. They used the words of the Blessed Beauty while refusing to recognize Abdul-Baha. They perverted the words of Baha'u'llah and the Master both in attacking our beloved guardian. And doesn't the pattern seem familiar in this day whenever we hear about it? They quote all the figures of our faith, the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdul-Baha, Shoghi Effendi, in order to try to deny the Universal House of Justice.
Yes. Well, they refuse to move forward with the covenant, don't they?
Exactly.
They get left behind wandering about like a ship without a rudder. Their ego has deprived them of the most exciting and comforting thing about the faith, the covenant.
That's right. And the ego is a subtle and sly serpent, the Master said. Oh, we're faithful to the covenant, they'll tell you, quite frankly. We accept the Bab, we just don't accept Baha'u'llah. Or we're loyal to the Bab and Baha'u'llah, they'll say, but we just don't accept Abdul-Baha. Or they'll swear they're firm in the covenant of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and the Master. It's just the beloved guardian they don't accept. Or they'll vow they couldn't be more loyal and devoted to the Bab, Baha'u'llah, the Master, the beloved guardian. It's just the Universal House of Justice they don't quite understand and deny. And by these protestations of innocence and partial loyalty, they seek to sow the seeds of doubt and poison the minds of the new and innocent Friends. They attack the covenant on all sides, the Master declares, while protesting their innocence and claiming to be faithful. Let the Master's own words indict them.
Abdu'l-Baha writes of these covenant breakers, quote, "They do not doubt the validity of the covenant, but selfish motives have dragged them to this condition. It is not that they ignore or are ignorant of what they do. They are perfectly aware, and still they exhibit opposition." Then the Master comforts the Friends with these words, "The covenant is tumultuous and wide. It casts ashore the full..."
The violation.
Violation.
I'm typed that wrong,
Yes.
Tony. I'm sorry, but that's what they're like dead bodies.
Yes.
And the sea won't accept a dead body.
And thus
Let it
rest
go,
ye
throws it up.
assured. Yes.
That's
Beautiful
wonderful,
words, really.
isn't it?
I can see that it really takes more than one study class to truly grasp the significance and the great importance of the covenant.
It does indeed far more, really.
But this has been a great help.
Well, we have to study, we have to meditate, we have to immerse ourselves in the waters of the covenant. We can't overemphasize the importance, the beauty of it. Just as we seem to inhale a fragrance when we come in contact with the faith, in like manner, when we're firm in the covenant, we seem able to catch a scent of violation quickly. It's almost a physical thing.
And wouldn't the friends be just as wise to be as wide awake concerning the danger of their writings?
It's imperative that they are. In one of his very last tablets from his pen, translated after his ascension, Abdu'l-Baha wrote that the Blessed Beauty, Baha'u'llah, was well aware of the device of the enemies to poison the pure believer by circulating their pernicious writings. Baha'u'llah said, quote, "If anyone comes to you with the book of the wicked violators, put him behind you." Baha'u'llah described these covenant breakers as manifestations of Satan, who would try to befoul the sweet waters of the faith of the believers by every means of deception and ruse. Therefore, Baha'u'llah warned, listen not to the nonsensical utterances of the manifestation of Satan.
Doesn't Satan mean, in a symbolical sense, the incarnation of ego and negation?
Yes, that's exactly what Baha'u'llah means, and he calls it nonsensical utterances. They're the very essence of denial and hatred. And in that same tablet, the Master showed his sadness at the gullibility of the friends in the West. In short, he said, the founders of this sedition, namely the violators of the covenant, are people whose aims are known to all the friends. Yet, O glorious God, they are deceived by them.
Well, that's probably why Abdu'l-Baha laid so much stress on a study of the covenant and on our need to be firm in the covenant, wouldn't you think?
Well, the beloved guardian said it was impossible to overemphasize the importance of this instruction. You see, blinded by their own ambitions and false doctrines, Abdu'l-Baha warned us, these covenant breakers will try to disrupt the Baha'i communities by using lies, deceit, and fraud. And yet he gives us a wonderful promise if we will be firm. And these are his words.
If the friends remain firm in the covenant, will there be any misunderstanding among them? No, by God. Except those who would have an evil intention and are thinking of leadership and of forming a party. These souls are at present among the pioneers of violation. This is because of their personal motives, for they thought of securing leadership and wealth, end quote.
Beware, beware, the Master said to the West, lest anyone should speak from the authority of his own thoughts or create a new thing out of himself. His Holiness Baha'u'llah shuns such souls.
Well, if we read the story of religious history correctly, this curse of covenant breaking did not begin with the Baha'i faith.
By no means. The people of Moses, the people of Christ, the other messengers of God, they all suffered likewise from this poisonous blight. What does the Master tell us about that, Tony?
Well, Bill, in short, the Master writes, from these holy utterances and those of His Holiness Christ, it becomes clear that bad associates bring about infection of bad qualities. It is impossible for a man to associate and befriend a leper and not be infected. This command is for the sake of protection and safeguard, end quote.
You see, spiritual leprosy races like a contagion if not arrested. And this is why the most important part of protection is prevention beforehand.
From the words you quote of Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah, it seems important then not only to shun the person of these violators, but also to avoid like the plague their writings as well.
Yes, we should indeed. We said something about that before. The Master warned against this himself. He cautioned us not to be deceived by the age-old methods of the covenant breakers. Every day, he said, I'm quoting now, every day, he said, they wrote and spread a pamphlet opposing Baha'u'llah, caused trouble and perplexity among the people. They inflicted the greatest injury and cruelty, yet they counted themselves firm in the covenant.
Well, you know, one of my friends who was quite interested in the faith asked me if this avoiding the covenant breakers correspondence wasn't something like having a list of banned books and forbidden reading.
No, not at all, really. You see, no soul is forced to do anything. We try to attract the heart, Baha'u'llah said, and not enforce the mind. And it's very important to understand that we're talking here about covenant breakers, not those who oppose or attack the faith who are not Baha'is. We try to have contact with such people and help them understand that we're friends, not enemies. People of other religions and beliefs and shades of thought, however different, even opposed to ours, these we associate with love and fellowship. Covenant breakers are those who have accepted the faith, then denied it, and now rise up to try to undermine and destroy it. And even these, when the news of their defection is first heard of, even these are approached with love through the authority of the World Center. We take every step we can to save them, to make every effort to talk to them, to win them back, help them to understand. Only when they persist in their views, only then are they declared covenant breakers. No people in religious history have been so lovingly and patiently dealt with before they were shut off from the community. And then it was only for the protection of the friends and not a punishment. It was to preserve the wholesome purity and security of our wonderful faith.
Every hour, the Master says, and I'm quoting him, they contrive new and call themselves oppressed. They appear as sheep, and in reality are as ferocious wolves. They exercise every sort of oppression, endeavor to destroy the foundation of the covenant, and claim to be Baha'is.
Exactly.
Well, now that's very true, but what about this frequent complaint of those souls who say they only want to see what the covenant breakers are writing, or they only want to talk with them in order to get their viewpoint?
Yes.
As after all, the Baha'i faith teaches the independent investigation of truth.
Yes, it does. It's very clever, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see, the principle of independent, and this is very important, the principle of the independent investigation of truth has to do with our search to find out if Baha'u'llah is the true one, to find out the truth of his mission to the world. Is Baha'u'llah the messenger of God, the true messenger of God? Is the Baha'i faith the truth? Now, in this search, we must not be influenced by anything. No one, family, friends, background, but only by our own mind, our own heart, and our own spirit. Then once that we have accepted Baha'u'llah, we believe him to be the messenger of God, then our search is ended. For we also accept his writings and his teachings. And you see, it is Baha'u'llah himself in his writings that has instructed us to avoid and to shun and have no contact with these violators of the covenant. You see, they're not people who are trying to find the truth. They're people who have found the truth and have renounced it and now are attacking it.
Yes.
Look at it
Quite
this
a
way.
distinction.
Yeah.
If we accept without question the report of a finest doctor, we want to find the best doctor in the world. We search and search until we find one we're absolutely convinced is the most supreme. And he has his own clinic that can solve all the problems of medicine. Now, if this doctor tells us that the disease that certain people are afflicted with is a dread malignant disease, infectious, that can kill us, then we don't, on the pretext of independent investigation of truth, say, well, if you don't mind, I think I'll go into the isolation ward and talk with him because I want independently to find this out. We don't ignore the doctor's advice and the warning and make contact with these infected people and associate with them. If we do, we're stricken with the same disease. It can't help but happen. Our independent investigation of truth to find a doctor we could rely on becomes meaningless. This excuse has nothing to do with the truth. It's the independent investigation of falsehood, not truth.
This is wonderful. You know, I must have needed this session because really I've been so enriched by this bill. It's been wonderful.
It certainly has.
Well, I'm very grateful.
I appreciate it.
I hope it'll be helpful for all of us when we have to deal with the covenant breakers, and the danger of association with them will be made clear. I think it helps to bring it home forcefully, at least. You know, the beloved Master Abdul-Baha, only 2 days before his passing, cabled us here in the West even one last time about the danger of such association. What was it he said, Tony?
He who sits with a leper catches leprosy.
Oh, how plain.
And I believe he wrote in that same hour some other very pointed remarks.
Yes, Bill, the Master wrote, quote, in the early days after the ascension of the Blessed Beauty, the center of violation, Muhammad Ali, was alone. Little by little, the infection spread. And this was due to companionship and association.
Imagine. And that's a quote from Abdul-Baha.
You know, it seems a pity that the progress of our teaching work has to be interrupted from time to time by such attacks.
Never feel that way. These attacks are really a blessing in disguise.
But it seems a pity that these enemies, such as the covenant breakers, should take up so much of our time.
Well, you know, if we're firm in the covenant, we should welcome these attacks, believe me, with delight. They prove the invincible fabric of the faith. They're campaign ribbons of victory for the radiant army of Baha'u'llah. Tony, would you hand me that book there of the Messages of the Guardian, 1932-46? Here, you see, these powerful words are from the Guardian and should remove any concern anyone should have about such attacks. Don't worry about them. Don't be disturbed in the least about them. Be pleased and happy and radiant. Listen to what our beloved Guardian writes to America. From the record of its tumultuous history, almost every page of which portrays a fresh crisis, is laden with the description of a new calamity, recounts the tale of a base betrayal, and is stained with the account of unspeakable atrocities, there emerges, clear and incontrovertible, the supreme truth that with every fresh outbreak of hostility to the faith, whether from within or without, a corresponding measure of outpouring grace, sustaining its defenders and confounding its adversaries, has been providentially released. communicating a fresh impulse to the onward march of the faith. This increased hostility is accompanied by a still more arresting revelation of divine power and more brilliant victories.
Strange, isn't it?
A cause that in the end will resolve these issues and will crush the resistance of those enemies through a still more glorious unfoldment of its inherent power. The resistless march of the faith of Baha'u'llah, viewed in this light, resolves itself into a series of rhythmic pulsations, precipitated on the one hand through the explosive outbursts of its foes and the vibrations of divine power on the other, which speed it with ever-increasing momentum along that predestined course traced for it by the hand of the Almighty.
That's very beautiful.
It is indeed. And there's more. Another paragraph. Beloved Guardian says, as opposition to the faith, from whatever source it may spring, whatever form it may assume, however violent it outbursts, this is admittedly the motive power that galvanizes on the one hand the souls of its valiant defenders and taps for them on the other fresh springs of divine and inexhaustible energy. Far from regarding any manifestations of hostility as an evidence of the weakening of the pillars of the faith, we should acclaim it both as a God-sent gift and a God-sent opportunity, which, if we remain undaunted, we can utilize for the furtherance of his faith and for the routing and complete elimination of its adversaries. Okay, you feel better now? Well, you see, beloved friends, this is why we should never be disturbed by attacks on the faith. Those that we don't bring on through our own neglect or indifference or faint-heartedness or unwisdom. The covenant of Baha'u'llah is a fortress for our protection. It's our impregnable shield against all onslaughts against the faith or against ourselves as Baha'is. The Master has written, every soul who is firm in the covenant is luminous, like unto a candle, which emanates its light on those around it. While every wavering soul is an utter failure, frozen, lifeless, dead, yet moving. This, Abdul-Baha continues, this one proof is sufficient to demonstrate the greatness of the covenant. Today, he writes in another place, every wise, vigilant, and foresighted person is awakened, and unto him are unveiled the mysteries that nothing save the power of the covenant is able to stir and move the hearts of humanity.
Beautiful. What a wonderful study class this has been, Bill. But you know, we haven't had a chance yet to introduce our guests present at the study class tonight.
I suggest we do it right now. Huh?
All right, let's go around from right to left. Rowena?
Rowena Burak, Los Angeles.
Joseph McCormack, Sierra Madre.
Marguerite Sears, Palm Springs.
I thought I recognized
Keith Quigley, Beverly Hills. Sylvine Happany, Los Angeles.
Gene Johnson, Culver Judicial District.
Tony Lees, Los Angeles, California.
William Sears, Palm Springs.
Robert Quigley, Beverly Hills.
Well, you know what lucky people we are, beloved friends. Tell me, where are the victories of the covenant breakers for the past 121 years? Where are the hearts of humanity they've stirred and led to Baha'u'llah? Where are their temples, their schools, their masses of believers? Where are their centers like a blanket around the world? Where's the evidence of any sign of power from these past and present enemies? Yet every one of you, of us, the loyal followers of Baha'u'llah, has only to gaze in any direction to witness the never-before-equaled victories of his precious faith. Magnificent shrines, beautiful houses of worship built in each continent, national assemblies representing over 260 countries, territories, and islands, 21,000 centers or more girdling the globe, an astonishing and unparalleled increase in the number of new believers among all classes and segments of society, among the Pygmies, the Aborigines, the Maori, the Eskimo, the Islander, from Muslim, Hindu, Buddha, Zoroastrian, pagan, agnostic, and atheistic background, among the black, the yellow, the white, the brown, and the red races, professors and ditch diggers, scholars and laborers, scientists and housewives, a true cross-section of humanity. The world has never before witnessed such a wave of earth-circling love as in the rise of the world order of Baha'u'llah. Mankind has never before in history witnessed such a flood of teaching victories among such a variety of peoples, unique and peerless. The spiritual conquest of the planet, beloved friends, is truly underway, and through the power of the covenant of Baha'u'llah. It's bringing new life to a dead world, a promise of future peace, security, and happiness for all our fellow men. May we share with you these words in closing our study class.
There is a power in this cause, a mysterious power, far, far, far above the ken of men and angels. That invisible power is the cause of all these outward activities. It moves the hearts. It rends the mountains. It administers the complicated affairs of the cause. It inspires the friends. It dashes into 1,000 pieces all the forces of opposition.
Those words are from the beloved Master, as are these. Now make an effort, the Master writes, and with all your heart and might, enkindle the fire of the love of the covenant. For in this day, the moving power throughout the whole world is the power of the covenant. It is the artery pulsating in the body of the world. Therefore, breathe the spirit of the covenant and testament as much as ye can into the hearts, so that the souls may progress day by day and obtain a new exhilaration.
You have been attending a study class on the significance of covenant breaking and its relationship to the greatness and majesty of the covenant of Baha'u'llah. It has been conducted by hand of the course Mr. William Sears. He was assisted by Mr. Anthony Lease, a member of the Auxiliary Board for the Hands of the Faith in the Western Hemisphere. We hope you'll